Okie doke. Can you give me a mic check?
Mic check, one,
Oh,
two.
hold on. Give me another one.
Mic check, one, two. Check, 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 check.
Welcome to the Let's Make Them Pay podcast. I am your host, Scott Bennett. And today we have a very special guest, Ian Troesoyer.
That's right.
That's okay.
That's
I want
right.
to make sure I got that pronunciation correct. You will frequently see him posting on Substack, TikTok, Instagram with the Sortition USA organization. Ian is an activist, a nurse practitioner, and an epidemiologist here in Chicago for a conference. He also is something of an expert on sortition, which we're going to be talking about today, an increasingly hot topic. Ian, welcome. Thank you for making your way to the Let's Make Them Pay studios.
Hey, Scott, thanks so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. So, first question's an easy one.
Yeah.
What is sortition? How do you describe it to people who aren't familiar with this concept?
Yeah, great question. So sortition means taking representative random samples of regular people and letting them take short turns making political decisions. And it's got a really long history. Despite what many people have heard, like in history class, Athenian democracy actually used sortition rather than direct democracy. And I would say like the way to think about sortition is it's a scaling mechanism that gets like a Dunbar number level of people in a room so they can like deliberate and like learn from each other and also like listen to experts so that they can be a representative and an informed group when they're making political decisions.
Yeah, I love it. And you mentioned Athens. I mean, that's how old this idea is. It goes way back. It's not any newfangled thing. And we're able to do it now with more accuracy, I guess, because our refined data sets and what have you.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like, so you mentioned I'm an epidemiologist, and Athens kind of used like a stratified sampling method. Like, so they had like different geographic tribes, and then they would select a certain number of people from each of those geographic tribes. So they, there's all sorts of problems with Athenian democracy. They don't include women, they have slaves, so I'm not holding Athens up as an example, but they have some impressive cultural achievements, and one of them is their democracy, and they achieved that through sortition. And even back then, even though they didn't really have a theory of like representative random sampling, they were still using a crude form of stratified sampling, which is really cool.
That is really cool. I love that. Okay, now, in a recent post, you made a point that elections are inherently aristocratic.
Right.
This might surprise some people who are used to growing up hearing that elections are the essence of democracy.
Yeah.
Now, why do you say that? What makes you say that? What's the connection? Why is there the connection between elections and democracy wrong in some way?
Yeah, great question. I think first it's good to just like define what do we mean by aristocracy and what do we mean by democracy.
Sure.
So if we look at the etymology of those words, aristocracy, aris or aristoi would be best, and krasi is like rule, right? So aristocracy is rule by the best, and democracy or the demos would be the common people. So democracy is ruled by the common people. For an aristocracy, and if you kind of think about the mechanism of elections, they are intended to select the best. When a lot of people, when they hear about sortition, they bring up this concern, like, what if you select an idiot or like someone with a disability or like, all sorts of concerns. And that's because elections are inherently aristocratic. You're trying to select someone who's the best representative of the community to speak on behalf of the community.
Right.
But that aristocratic mechanism introduces bias that is unavoidable, right? So me thinking as an epidemiologist, like if we just think about what the best want, that's going to have all sorts of like cultural determinants about who's going to filter up into that best category.
Yeah.
Right. So, prior to the 20th century, that would have included essentially no women, essentially no people of color.
Right.
And that doesn't mean anything about their inherent ability. It means about all this bullshit that culture lays on top of people's like level of achievement. And all of those things, they influence like the founding fathers. They wanted a natural aristocracy.
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson wrote that that's what his goal was, right?
Mm-hmm.
They wanted, like, instead of the hereditary aristocracy of Europe, they wanted like the people that were genetically or, had the best birth or background. But we know that in retrospect, a lot of that is bullshit.
Right.
There's like so much of people's potential that is determined by their circumstance in life.
Yeah.
So when we just select, when we have an aristocratic mechanism, we are going to entrench privilege. And like, there's no method out there that can really say like, we are truly meritocratic. We've filtered out all of the cultural factors. We're just getting like this person's potential, their moral goodness, their representative of the community is bullshit, right?
Yeah.
Culture is too complex.
Yeah.
And so when you have these mechanisms that are selecting for the best, which elections, by definition, that's what they're doing. You are like election and elite, they share a historical root word as well. They are meant to elevate the best.
Yeah. I just thought of that today. I was listening to somebody speak and they said they made a reference to the elect, which is, just like that, the best, the elect, and so there's the same word. And I think that this was something that was understood perhaps 2,000 years ago by the Athenians in a way that has been completely lost to the modern day audience.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point too. So prior to really like the mid 1800s, elections were not considered democratic.
Right.
During, if you read the founders' writing, they were against democracy. And so why, if they were against democracy, why did they include elections so heavily in the governing system that they designed?
Right.
It's because they didn't think elections were democratic.
Right. They knew.
Right. Yeah. Like all of these philosophers, like before and around the time of the founders. So like Aristotle, Montesquieu, Rousseau, they all have these quotes where they basically say, if you want to get an aristocracy or an oligarchy, use elections.
Right.
And if you want to get a democracy, use sortition.
Right.
All of these thinkers were saying like, yeah, if you want to get a democracy, you use random sampling.
Yeah. It's so crazy to me that this has just been lost to time. And now people have this, and I can't help but feel it's like it's intentional, this blurring of the lines to where, people can't imagine democracy without elections.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that is, for the sortition movement, that's something that we need to overcome. And I mean, I think, don't get me wrong, like elections are totally superior to dictatorships. Like, I mean, being able to swap out teams of elites has benefits. And I'm not saying necessarily that there's like always misalignment, but we know class interest makes a difference for a lot of different issues.
Yeah.
There's that famous study by Gillens and Page published in 2014 where they looked at like what average Americans want and then like policy outcomes, right? And they found that there is a near zero, non-statistically significant correlation between what regular people want and what actually ends up happening. The things that get passed that we like are basically passed because large institutional donors and rich people also like them.
Right.
Where we diverge with the interests of those people, we essentially never get what we want.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that Gillens and Page study. I've done posts about it in the past also. And that you can have 80%, 90% agreement amongst the public and yet still get no traction whatsoever in the legislature.
And that would basically empirically prove that we do not live in a democracy, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, who supports so many of the things that are going on in our government right now?
Right, right.
This kind of leads into another question I have. Are you a fan at all of Malcolm Gladwell and his show Revisionist History? Have you seen or listened to the episode?
Yeah, I have.
Powerball Revolution.
So that like. I'm going to do a little sidetrack and talk about how I got into Sortition.
Oh, sure. So that was going to be one of my questions. So please.
It's Malcolm Gladwell's podcast.
That was what sparked your interest.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay.
Like you mentioned, I work in public health. Sometimes I have testified in front of the legislature on behalf of the health department where I work. I understand like, when you're testifying in front of a legislative committee, they have interests that like are not there in the room, like their primary voters that they are ultimately answerable to.
Right.
And so coming in as like an expert witness on a certain piece of legislation, their minds may have already been made up, right? And that's like, and so I was running into this issue where I felt like, oh yeah, there's really good evidence behind this policy, and if I can just like convince them that this is a good idea. Well, it'll pass, and we'll save money. It'll be a good thing, right?
Right.
But that's not the case. And so I was very interested in democracy reform. And so initially was thinking like, okay, ranked choice voting.
Yeah.
And then I got introduced to approval voting by Utah Approves. Shout out to Utah Approves. I think there's a lot of hardworking, dedicated people in Utah. And then like Condorcet methods, star methods, and like ultimately, my brother-in-law, Chris, hey Chris, said like, hey, have you heard about sortition? And he heard about it from this Malcolm Gladwell podcast.
Yeah.
And then it was like a light bulb went off. It was like, oh my God, like, especially having like a background in population science and like statistics, epidemiology.
Excellent.
It was like the most accurate way we have to understand a population is representative random sampling. And so why would we not apply that to democracy?
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So some things that came out in that episode, I would highly recommend it. The Powerball Revolution. Look it up wherever you find podcasts. They kind of try to create some do some examples of sortition, and I love this part, which they found that the people that they expected to do really well in these sortition kind of exercises in when they would get people together, the ones that were charismatic and seemed like natural leaders weren't necessarily the most valuable players when it came to coming to decisions.
Right.
And it kind of underscored this assumption that we have that, because we're so into elections that, oh, well, we got to pick the most charismatic guy or the guy who, has the most experience in this or that.
Right.
But I think what we're really doing is sorting for something entirely different that people don't even realize is, as you mentioned, primaries. We have basically a silent primary that happens, a money primary that happens before anybody even is announced as a contender.
Totally.
And so what we're really sorting for is the ability to fundraise. That's your number one job as a legislator, is to always be fundraising.
Yeah, totally.
And so, I mean, can you kind of draw out for us a little bit, like the ways that sortition neutralizes the money factor?
Yeah. I mean, the devil is always in the details, right? When people first hear about this policy, they raise a lot of good concerns and questions. And so I don't want to minimize those things. What the sortition movement is arguing for is like well-designed sortition processes where we're really trying to think about democratic accuracy. There are stupid ways to do this, just like there are stupid ways to do elections, right?
Yeah.
As far as like neutralizing money. So much of like the money pathway in politics is facilitated by elections, right? If you're somebody with great policy ideas, you need, the more money you have, the more free time you have, the more effective your campaigning is going to be.
Yeah.
And so, there's a good reason that working people with demanding caregiving responsibilities are drastically underrepresented in politics, right?
Right.
There was some analysis, I can't remember the university that published it, that found like only 2% of state legislators come from the working class, and they defined working class in a slightly problematic way, but still, like, the working class is the majority. And it's insane to think about, okay, there's a really significant cultural bias and class bias that goes into selecting politicians. And even if the politicians are not like specifically aware of it, or they're just, they're trying to do their best, that's still going to influence the types of policy that they have.
Absolutely.
Because we're all human, we all have limited perspective. And so if everybody in the room is a landlord or mostly knows landlords rather than being a renter or mostly knowing renters, and you're talking about like, okay, let's talk about renter-landlord disputes. You're going to hear a lot more like anecdotal information from people that like, oh yeah, there's this renter that was terrible and trashed the place. We need to protect those landlords, right? Rather than if you have a representative group like, oh my God, I can tell you some bad landlord stories.
Yeah.
Like,
or just having one or two people who are actually renters in the room makes such a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stand up. Stand out. At Windy City Print Shop, you'll find original designs celebrating community, solidarity, mutual aid, and the belief that ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Resist with your whole chest. Windy City Print Shop. Visit windycityprintshop.etsy.com.
So sortition also dismantles the idea of having a career in politics. Is it possible, in your view, that it could also disable lobbying and foreign influence, or like gerrymandering, for example, would be unnecessary? Are there any other big advantages that I'm missing here?
Yeah, I think so. Gerrymandering is a good one. So with gerrymandering, we're kind of thinking about, okay, what's a geographic district that we're going to have a single representative go to, like a governing body?
Yeah.
I know that there's lots of like communists and socialists who believe in like a delegate scheme. I would caution against that strongly, because even in like worker council delegate schemes, like the people who are going to be selected for those delegate roles are still going to be the articulate, confident, socially dominant.
Right.
If there is some privilege that exists within the society where this, future worker council delegate scheme exists, the privileged are going to be overrepresented in the governing body, and the answer to that is like always, well, these people are going to be recallable, and I understand that would totally be a benefit. But the problem is rational ignorance. And I think if you're going to understand sortition, like that is like the fundamental problem that sortition solves. What rational ignorance means is that it is not rational for someone to spend a lot of time becoming informed,
Right.
if their input on the outcome is so small.
Right.
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 So if I'm someone like, let's say just for our current environment, if I'm like one vote among 1 million people or 330 million people or whatever, right? The issues don't get less complex, but my influence goes way down.
Yeah.
And so if I have to think about, okay, to become informed on this topic, I need to spend like 6 hours thinking about climate policy, right? And reading the legislation. What does cap and trade mean, or whatever I'm doing, right?
Right.
It's going to take hours of my time. And the probability that my input changes the outcome is basically butt kiss, right?
Yeah.
And so is that 6 hours better spent like playing with my kids or getting a second job if I need money or whatever? So that rational ignorance thing is the thing that makes like informed democratic decision making really hard in like a delegate scheme. Because even if your delegates are out doing stuff, you still need to be researching what they're doing to effectively hold them accountable. You need to know what they're doing, and you need to know like whether those policies that they're pursuing are a good idea or not. So the burden of being informed, the epistemic burden, doesn't change with a delegate scheme. It gets really hard, in fact.
Yeah.
And so, and that's the same struggle with direct democracy. Like I would say, for direct democracy, like a lot of people say, when I post these videos, they say, well, everyone has a phone now and we've got like crypto. Like why I mean, we've got blockchain, right?
Right.
So why can't everyone just vote on their phone?
Right.
And the true answer is that the limitation was never technological.
Right.
The limitation is based on human attention.
Mm.
And that's not going away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talking about representation, thinking about how many members of our national legislature are millionaires,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this is one thing that I love most about sortition is that millionaires make up a small fraction of our actual society,
Right.
but make up a huge proportion of our legislature. And this is a way to suddenly shut them, like, well, okay, less than 1% of the American population is a millionaire or more, or at least has $2 million to be in the top 1% of wealth. But sortition would be like, okay, well, they're 1% of the population, so they can be about 1% of the legislature in this case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And I know I am like sympathetic to people who say like, well, we should just like exclude all millionaires. But honestly, I say like no exclusions. Like the 1% is 1%.
Right.
Like those people should still get a say. I mean, fundamentally, I think that every human being should be politically equal.
Yeah.
And so and I think there's lots of, there's other people that, say like, well, what sort of exclusions do you need for a sortition body? You really don't want idiots or extremists in there. And I would say, no, actually, you want a representative, a good representation of the population.
Yeah.
There are idiots and extremists among us.
Right.
And it's okay for them to be in the room. Where they disagree with the consensus, they're going to be overruled. But even having them present is useful, because then the group understands we have to deal with perspectives like this. We have to account for this person in society. And I think that improves decision making.
Yeah.
Because it's not really the competence of the individual that matters. It's like the competence of the group.
Right.
And if they're face to face with like someone who's a political extremist, then that helps the group anticipate like, how is this policy going to be received by this particular group in society?
Sure, sure. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so one other concern that I hear in the comment section, which you kind of mentioned, accountability. Like, what kind of accountability structures are there for a sortition system?
Yeah, good question. So I think one way to think about accountability is like, can we punish someone for doing something we don't like? And your ability to punish your elected representatives is really minuscule.
Yeah.
You know, even though like Congress has, you know, they've been in the red for unfavorability ratings for decades, right?
I think, yeah, something around 14% approval rating for the House of Representatives.
Right.
Right.
But we know incumbents have a huge advantage.
Like a 90% reelection rate.
Right.
Like there's your disconnect in democracy right there.
Yeah, totally. So like, first of all, you're not holding politicians accountable.
Right.
I mean, the few cases where that's happening, like you don't necessarily know that you're trading it out for someone better. The thing that you're electing is like mostly a performative person. I mean, I'm not saying they don't have other skills, but like performance is the primary skill that's necessary to become a politician.
Yeah.
Not true expertise, not more moral character, but the ability to put on a good show.
Sure.
And hopefully they have moral character and true expertise, but those aren't guaranteed. You know, the performance is enough to get someone elected.
Yeah.
To go back to like, how does sortition keep people accountable? I would say it's the difference between a principal agent problem and like actually having like direct like principal control over an issue. So a principal agent problem means like you have to keep someone accountable because they're not like you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have someone like, for example, like a lawyer is your agent, and you don't maybe know enough to like say, are they really doing my best? You know, like when they're charging me for money, are they really doing my will? Whereas like if you the principal are like representing yourself, yes, it might introduce like competence problems, but the accountability like mechanism is totally changed because it's not a principal agent problem. It's like the real communities that are being affected by that policy are in the room.
Right.
There's always a risk for corruption, and there we can talk about that some more later too. But
yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Okay,
that's something that people are always worried about, and I think it's because our current system is so obviously corrupted. So you know, and so many of our politicians are obviously corrupt. And paid for, you know, take money for influence, and you know, you look at the APAC situation. I mean, there's so much money influence happening in our system. So, like, how would a sortition system take measures to prevent corruption of that nature?
Yeah, great question. So, devil's always in the details, right? There are stupid ways to do sortition, but I think it's actually much easier to prevent corruption with sortition.
Yeah.
And some of that is due to the short terms and the random selection. So for nerds who are into game theory, right? Like it's the difference between like the repeated prisoner's dilemma or the single prisoner's dilemma. So prisoner's dilemma is this famous like game theory game where you basically are having like two different prisoners rat themselves out, right? And in big simulations, like the repeated prisoner's dilemma, the dominant strategy ends up being cooperating, like working together. And in this case, working together means corruption. Like you working together with someone who's trying to corrupt you and like doing a little tit for tat, like in the back, right?
Yeah.
In a single prisoner's dilemma, it's really hard to establish trust. And so the dominant strategy in a single prisoner's dilemma where you can't establish like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The dominant strategy is to defect and like to rat the person out. And if we think about this more concretely, right? So let's say we've got a jury, right? And someone comes to like a juror with a bribe. That bribe has to be laid out transparently and from the beginning, basically. They can't be like, oh, you know, I heard you're running for re-election, right? Would you? I heard you might get a primary challenger. Do you want some help with that? Or it seems like a tough election this year.
Yeah.
Right. You can't be subtle. It's got to be like, I will pay you $50,000 for you to vote this way.
Right.
And that makes that bribe easier to catch and easier to report.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing like we can do with jurors is we can just like tell people, hey, this is juror orientation. We are going to have federal agents undercover attempting to bribe you. If you report them, you'll get a little bonus. And if you don't report them, you're going to prison.
Wow.
Or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
So like, I mean,
thanks.
right. Yeah. So I mean, like, there are ways to make it clearly in someone's best interest to report when people approach them for bribes.
Sure.
And like, I would say, the American jury system, the American like justice system has serious problems. But I think the proof is in the pudding that like indicted corporations and indicted politicians tend to avoid jury trials like the plague, right?
Mhm.
If you think about like where the Trump administration has lost, it's been in the juries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I do like the jury example, but there are some differences between how sortition works and how a jury in a trial works.
Yeah.
And so people always bring up that they have voir dire in a jury. And would there be anything like that to eliminate people in sortition, do you think?
My strong preference would be no. And like I think so voir dire is like where the attorneys can like pick someone out and say, nah, this person's going to be biased against the defense or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I think that has classically and empirically been a tool for racism within the justice system, as well as classism and other problems, right? Even though they're not technically allowed to discriminate based on like race, I think there's good empirical evidence that still happens.
Yeah.
So I would say no voir dire. And of course, like a 12 person for like a criminal jury, or like 25 or whatever for a grand jury, like those are not representative samples.
Right.
Juries are like a really weak form of sortition.
Yeah.
The fact that they work as well as they do is a testament to like the underlying structure.
Right.
But they could be seriously improved. I think
there's a little bit of self-selection. It's the people who actually show up when they get the jury summons, and instead of just ignoring it, right?
Totally.
Is there usually like an opt-in factor with sortition also?
Yeah, I think that's another good question, because that's totally going to be a weakness, especially early on in this movement. And this movement is something that like exists out in the real world. Like there have been over 1,000 real world citizens assemblies or civic assemblies that use sortition, usually to make advisory recommendations to like to a political body that has real power, but sometimes like really having real power. For those citizens assemblies, like the usual model is voluntary participation. And like as an epidemiologist, I know that introduces bias. We can account for that with stratified random sampling, so that we're trying to like, okay, we know the population parameter is that there's like this many people of color, there's this many people in this economic class, there's this many people who are, identify as female or whatever, right? And then we can like try to select a sample population that's going to match the whole population.
Yeah.
But that's definitely inferior to like true representative random sampling that would be mandatory. I'm going to go into the weeds. Like,
lay it on me, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No apology necessary.
The design that I really like is Terry Bouricius's multi-body sortition.
Okay.
And for your viewers out there, he's got a book that you can download for free. This benefactor paid like $12,000 to the publisher so that we could like release this academic book and have anyone download it. So that's
fantastic.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But the book is called Democracy Without Politicians, and you can just find it on democracywithoutpoliticians.org. But basically the design is this. There's like a dichotomy between like sortition bodies that develop proposals and sortition bodies that decide whether those proposals are actually like ratified and become law. And I think that cognitive distinction is really important, because like if you and I like sat in a room, were randomly selected to design a policy on, tax policy or something, we are going to be biased in favor of our own creation, right? Mm-hmm. The personalities that are in that room, we've hammered this out and sweated it out, and we're like, no, this is the thing, right? So we are probably not fit to judge our own handiwork. And so that's why there's this dichotomy to say like, okay, we're going to have a voluntary sample of about 100 people, like a small enough group that you can have all-to-all communication. And these people are going to sit down, come up with a single policy proposal, and then they'll, just go back to their regular lives. That policy then should go in front of like a shorter term mandatory body of like 500 people that are just gonna like get a presentation of the pros and cons, be able to ask questions. The answers to those questions should like go into like the legislative record, so that like people know like, oh yeah, when we're looking back at legislative intent, we can see they answered questions in this way, right?
Yeah.
And that 500, that group of 500 service should be quasi-mandatory, kind of like a jury, but you're thinking like a weekend or two to like hear the pros and cons and then vote it up or down.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a good mix because like this group that designs policies, they're going to, depending on the complexity of the policy, they might spend weeks, they might spend months. This could disrupt someone's life pretty significantly. But at the same time, you don't want just voluntary participation because even though like people say, it's unjust to coerce someone or force someone to be a part of this, it's also unjust to pass stupid laws and force everyone to follow them.
Yeah,
and
truly.
So we want a representative sample that really represents the population. And the way that you do that is basically with simple random sampling, ideally that's like mandatory or quasi-mandatory.
Yeah. But of course, going back a little bit to the corruption question is, one thing that I don't think a lot of people appreciate is that you need well-paid legislators, right? Like one of the things that they learned a long time ago is if you don't pay legislators, then the only people who can afford to do it are the rich, right? They're the only ones who have the time and the money to go just look at the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Who could afford to take 4 months off and go live in Philadelphia and hammer this thing out? Only the slaveholders and George Washington, the richest man in the country, and, and Nepo babies like James Madison.
Yeah.
So, paying legislators a decent amount of money, people are always like, it seems intuitive, like, oh, pay a minimum wage, and then they'll care about our economic things. And it's so misguided because you actually have to pay people a decent amount for their time. And I think you could, with something like this, you could easily, if you have the purse, the government purse, then you could pay these people well.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think you should pay people well.
Yeah.
It should feel like an honor.
Right.
And I think there should be like accommodations for language barriers and disabilities and like probably provided childcare. I like I mentioned, I'm a nurse practitioner. And so for me, like my patients aren't just going to disappear. So like having like locums coverage for me or locums coverage for people who have small businesses, which is basically like hire a temp worker to take my spot if I would want. I mean, I think those kinds of interventions would be really important if we actually want a pretty representative group for those voluntary samples.
Right. Well, and how, I mean, the proof is right there. Like to people, that would be the proof right there that that you actually have real people participating and, the government actually takes steps to facilitate that and make it happen. And then that's all possible.
Yeah.
And people don't seem to understand, can't imagine those things.
Yeah.
Because we have anything close to that these days.
Yeah. And it's funny, ancient Athens like dealt with that problem too, because initially the design was like, they didn't necessarily pay people.
Yeah.
And so they had a bunch of like wealthy, idle old people that were randomly selected or, volunteering for service. And then once they started paying people, they got much better participation.
Right. I think I heard at one point that basically every male who was of age who could participate, did at some point in their life. It's the idea of to be ruled by, but also to take part in the ruling.
Yeah. And to be clear, Athens, definitely flawed. Right.
Slaveholding society, not great.
Yeah.
But a true, it was, as Astra Taylor said in her book, it wasn't advance, it wasn't advance for the people. And one of my favorite historians, political economists, Michael Parenti, like to say that democracy is an invention by the people of history to restrain the power of wealth.
Yeah.
And so when you have actual democracy, you're able to do that.
Right.
Yeah. I love that. So can you give us some examples of where this is working in the world and how, that it's actually, because I know this is a lot more popular outside of the United States, that people are actually giving it a try in different countries around the world in different places. It is happening here in the United States also. Can you talk first about any kind of global real world examples and then some of the citizen assemblies that are happening here in the US?
Yeah. So it seems like France is kind of like the bleeding edge of this movement.
Nice.
The work of Helene Landemore is really impressive. France has had some really big citizens assemblies, like they had in response to the Yellow Vest movement. They had the Citizens Assembly on the climate. So basically, to back up for the Yellow Vest movement, President Macron passed, or their government passed a like a carbon tax, right? And I'm in favor of carbon taxes, but the thing is, like, without a land value tax, which is the other thing I'm really passionate about, basically you're going to punish people who have to like live in the suburbs and drive into urban areas for work.
Right.
So like the rich person that lives downtown, like they can just like hop on the metro and go wherever they need to. Carbon tax isn't going to affect them very much.
Yeah.
The people who are living like way the hell out in the boonies, like they're going to be feeling that carbon tax. So, you know, this is my little plug that like if you're going to do a carbon tax, you should pair it with a land value tax. So you're going to compensate those people who live way the hell out in the boonies. But anyways, the Yellow Vest movement was like people rebelling against this carbon tax, which they saw as, you know, basically elitist, right? And the way that government dealt with that problem is they said, hey, we'll convene a citizens assembly on the climate. And then you guys are going to make the recommendations about how France should move forward with the climate recommendations, right? It's a really cool project. Unfortunately, the government filtered out like a lot of the recommendations, but as far as people who are skeptical of like, do regular people come up with good policies? Yeah, they do. Like you should check out that Citizens Assembly on the Climate. So, I mean, that's a really classic example. To move more local, so I would say like the only membership-based organization for sortition in the United States that I'm aware of is the one that I volunteer for, which is Sortition USA.
Okay.
And it's free to join. If you want to contribute in any way, whether it's time or money, or just like saying like, yeah, I think sortition is a cool idea, we would love to have you. So sortitionusa.org/members.
Sign up.
Yeah. But anyways, like we have a shoestring budget. The vast majority of the work that we do is volunteer. We have an executive director that we don't pay well enough. Hey, Leonora. But anyways, we had a small grant program that we were able to give a couple $1,000s to a local sortition advocacy group in LA, Public Democracy LA, so PDLA. And those guys are awesome. They took like this really small micro grant and did a couple like mini demonstration assemblies. And then right like just before that, LA had like this crisis where there were some like city councilors caught on a hot mic saying like some really racist shit, right? And they like activists there were able to use that crisis to basically say, we need city charter reform. And PDLA, our like local sortition group in LA, like they were able to get a civic assembly, a sortition selected civic assembly, like directly involved in that process. There were like homeless people from LA that were helping to make recommendations to change LA's city charter. And that's like really goddamn cool, I think.
That is some real democracy happening.
Right. That's real democracy. So shout out to PDLA. Those guys are awesome.
Yeah. And we met Max. He came and talked to us this week.
Right.
Yeah. Give us some insight on his experience. It sounded phenomenal.
Yeah. Really cool. So I mean, at this point, there have been like over 1,000 citizens assemblies around the world. Most of the ones in the United States have been advisory, but there are some cool exceptions. So like Michigan's Independent Redistricting Commission is like they use essentially a grand jury, which is like a sortition selected body, to redraw their district boundaries. And like for me personally, I think the most important place to use sortition is like writing the rules for our rulers, like places where politicians have an inherent conflict of interest. Like I don't think anybody out there thinks that politicians should be drawing their own district boundaries. That is a stupid idea. They're going to try to rig the game.
Totally commonplace though, everywhere in the country.
But Michigan, that it doesn't happen.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a grand jury that does that, and I think I mean, there's always like pros and cons to real world implementations, but I think the Michigan Independent Redistricting Commission is awesome. The other real world example is like Oregon Citizens Initiative Review Body. Like what they do is when they have citizens initiatives, and this is like on a case-by-case basis, so it doesn't happen with every ballot initiative, but basically they have another grand jury sized body, like 25 to 35 people, like review the ballot initiative and like just have regular people say, yeah, I think this is good for regular people, or no, this is bad for regular people. I love ballot initiatives, but the trouble with them is like you need a lot of money to get them on the ballot most of the time. So either you're looking for some beneficial class traders to help sponsor your ballot initiative.
Right.
Or, you know, it's like the way those policies are designed are not by the working class, not by common people. And so I think it's fair to have some uneasiness about some ballot initiatives.
Sure.
So to have that independent like review body that's like regular people that get to hear the pros and cons, super useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I love it.
Hi, this is C.K. Morris, the author of The Shadow Family. If you like horror, action, comedy, if you enjoy skin-crawling, gore-soaked mayhem, grab a copy of The Shadow Family and check it out for yourself.
Buy your copy on Amazon today.
So yeah, so we already brought this up throughout the course of the conversation, but people in the comments section will always bring up Idiocracy, which is a great movie, by the way.
Yeah,
but
love it.
But no trust in the common knowledge or the common abilities of the intelligence level of our fellow citizens, I find. So this is reflected in concerns about actual democracy being mob rule. Do you have any anxiety about handing normal people power over their lives?
I think we can look at historical examples of people having those exact same concerns about handing power to women or people of color or unlanded individuals. And, I think, frankly, like those are all unfounded, right?
Yeah.
Like our society didn't suddenly collapse or crumble when we did those things. If anything, they got slightly better, right? And, that's only slightly because that's like the limitation of elections, basically. So I would say, like, when people say, like, oh, yeah, we can't trust idiots, to do this stuff, I would say, no, like the just thing to do is to empower people first.
Yeah.
And this is a story that I like talked about on our social media, but like so we talked about how sortition was like the way to do democracy prior to the US Revolution, and it was sort of forgotten about for a couple hundred years.
Right. Conveniently.
The person who reintroduced it was CLR James, which is like this black historian and socialist. He like met Trotsky. He's a really cool guy. He wrote this like famous history called the Black Jacobins, which you should check out. But yeah, CLR James is because he was a historian, he was reading like histories of ancient Athens and then wrote this article called "Every Cook Can Govern."
Yeah.
And in that he said like, hey, Athens was like kind of kicking ass on this democracy front. And if we wanted like real democracy, like a government where the working class was really empowered, we would use sortition. And so that's like the reintroduction of sortition into modern society is with CLR James.
Fantastic.
And like he, being like a descendant of slaves, someone who like, I think he was born in the Caribbean, so like a colonized place. He was used to these arguments from like colonizer nations basically saying, we just need to wait. And we just need to wait in those, they're not quite ready for democracy. Let's wait until they're educated enough or they're not ready to rule themselves. And
which I think they said for Haiti for 200 years after their slave revolt.
Yeah. So anyways, like just calling them on their bullshit and saying, no, empowerment should come first.
Yeah.
Like, and the thing is, yes, empowerment is sort of like a gun to the head to society to say like, yeah, you should improve your education system. You should improve the healthcare system so people's living standard, because those people will be governing your country.
Right.
But it's not about their inherent capacity. People do have the capacity to rule themselves.
Yeah.
But empowerment should come first.
Yeah, I agree.
You can't wait until someone's ready. Who's going to determine when they're ready, right? Like, that's some unjust bullshit.
Yeah, I agree. And are you familiar with supported decision making? They have this for disabled people. It's kind of a process to make sure that the disabled person has a voice in what happens to them.
Yeah.
So I imagine that you could have similar kind of accommodations.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't think there should be any restrictions. I think like even people with severe intellectual disabilities should be included in these bodies and should have a voice.
Yeah.
And where they disagree with the consensus, yes, they're going to be overruled. But there are actually, I would say, there's some really easy cases I could point to where including those people in the room is going to actually make the decision making better.
Yeah.
So to think about, like, let's say you have a sortition body that is designing a transit system for a city. And there's someone with a severe intellectual disability in the room. And having that person there, understanding the limitations that person works with, is going to help improve the design of that transit system.
Yeah.
It's not weakening decision-making, it is improving decision-making.
Yeah. Great points. Great points. I appreciate that. Especially as a father of a child with Down syndrome. It's so easy. You see people, they just dismiss her or, treat her like she's not even in the room or treat her like an object. And, that always rankles me. So,
Totally.
you know, I love the idea of bringing everybody in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much.
If she has a trusted person that she wants to bring with her to like help her participate, fantastic.
Yeah.
But she should get a say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, so one commenter put it as not just redistributing power, but redefining who we think is worthy of power. What are some of the biggest hills that people need to climb to kind of buy into this idea of sortition?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've learned that you probably can't convince everybody.
Sure.
So I would say, you know, we've talked about some of the biggest like hills to climb as far as like, well, can't we just use direct democracy? And like, oh man, what about those idiots or extremists? And so we've kind of touched on those things. As far as like other hills to climb, I would say implementation is going to be a challenge. Like a lot of people say, cool idea. How are you going to make it happen, right?
Right.
No matter what you do, some like elite oligarch aristocracy is going to like fuck this up and then you won't be able to do anything, right?
Right.
Or it's going to be corrupted in some way. And I would say that's a legitimate concern. And I would say there's no like playbook for how this actually plays out, right? I think it's undeniable that we live in historic times, whether that's like environmental changes or whether that's technological changes, society will change.
Yeah.
And there's this thing called the illusion of continuity where like, you know, we live our day-to-day lives and we feel like, oh yeah, everything's the same. Everything's always been the same. Like 100 years ago or less than 100 years ago was World War II, the Great Depression. 100 years before that was the Civil War. 100 years before that was the Revolutionary War. Like these are like lifetime scales where like enormous changes have happened.
Right.
Change is inevitable and it
Yeah.
will happen again. And I just really hope that the sortition movement is matured to the point where like when that major change happens, that the people can demand that they be put in power for once.
Yeah, and I think in that case, the example from LA is so germane to what we're talking about. I was doing some reading recently about general strikes, and there's a very famous date that's been put out by the United Auto Workers, May 1st, 2028, as a possible date for a big general strike.
Yeah.
And you know, a bunch of other unions are encouraged to have that date in mind. But as I was reading about it, another person made a great point, which is like, you never know when opportunity is going to come for something like that. For people right now are completely disenchanted with our system.
Right.
And if there was some kind of scandal where, you know, sortition advocates could just point to it and go like, look, here's your another example of how corrupt election systems are and how much they're not representing us.
Right.
And just, you know, seize the day, seize the moment, just like they did in Los Angeles with the city council that you described, and just be like, here's an alternative that we have. It's Milton Friedman is someone I don't admire or respect at all, but he said that, you know, when a crisis comes up, you need to be ready for it.
Right.
You need to have your plan ready to go.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. You know,
Yeah.
you gotta have it all drawn, you know, ready to go. Like, here it is. Here's your option.
We got a lot to learn from those neoliberals, man.
Don't say that. But yeah, I think that's a great point. And one thing that I love about sortition, and this is from doing a post about it and having people respond really positively to it, is when people learn about it, they get excited about it. They're like, I had no idea that this could even be possible. Like, I love how people in this day and age are willing to get on board with something that sounds different and sounds a little scary, but could actually be hugely empowering.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people see the need for fundamental reform of our government in the United States.
Yeah.
And even though, like, as a person living in the United States, we're really U.S. centric, but there's a serious problem with democracy affecting basically every mature democracy around the world.
Yeah.
You know, kind of sliding towards authoritarianism and like definitely like hatred and discrimination against immigrants. Like there's like, we have a problem, right?
Yeah.
And so when people are thinking like, yeah, we need fundamental change, we need constitutional change.
Yeah.
Totally, I agree.
I agree.
And I think when those people try to think about, I mean, as a reformer trying to think about, okay, why are we so screwed up now, and how are we going to fix it? Like, I think, pointing to things like ranked choice voting or proportional representation or like publicly funding elections or holding elections on Saturdays or like requiring everyone to vote. Australia already does all of those things.
Right.
Every single one.
And it's having all the same problems we're having.
Yes. And in like the 2024 Constitutional Values Survey that Australia conducted, only like 33.6% of their population had any trust in their government at all.
Wow.
So if we think about all of those interventions and thinking about how many miles ahead of us Australia is,
Right.
that can't be the goal.
Right.
33.6 or whatever percent of like trust in the government. That is god awful. That can't be the goal. And so like trying to think about, okay, what do I as an advocate or like an activist want? I basically want the institutions that establish and amend constitutions to be the most democratically accurate ones we can think of. And to me, that means sortition. Like a lot of people, when they think about establishing constitutions, like those did not happen democratically. Usually they're the project of like some revolutionaries prior to a war where they happen to be successful, right? And so it's a weird, narrow slice of the population that tries to think about these founding documents. For the United States, is after the Revolution, 1787, where they're writing the Constitution. But still, it's like, it's a very narrow slice of the population, a very elite slice of the population that's coming up with these foundational rules.
Yeah.
And the rules that they made are incredibly hard to change.
Yeah.
And I don't go in for founder worship stuff. I think that's dangerous. And even if you are someone who goes in for founder worship, I think the founders would think you're weird. So don't do that. Not that I think we should care what the founders think necessarily, but like, they thought that every generation we should basically be rewriting that document.
Right. Thomas Jefferson said it was basically, once every 25 years or something, he expected a new constitution. And it was Antonin Scalia, ultra arch conservative, who pointed out that it takes about 99% consensus to get a constitutional amendment in this country. And he's like, it should be hard, but it shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
That's where we're at. Like,
totally.
Good luck getting a 99% consensus about anything in this country.
Right. I mean, we are ruled by the dead hand of the past, a piece of paper, and that's problematic.
Something that enshrines slavery.
Yes, yeah, and talks about savages, for God's sake, and like,
Right.
We have moved so far beyond what the founders considered as just, right? We have moved so far beyond their conception of who should govern. They wanted a natural aristocracy. I think most people want a democracy. We want the common people to rule.
Right.
Our Constitution does not reflect that.
Yeah.
And even if like, I hear people in the comment section, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. So republic doesn't mean representative. Republic, the etymology of that word is res publica, which is like of the or by the, for the people, right? So republic is a broader category that means like the government is for everyone. The founders still wanted an aristocracy. They thought it was in the best interests of everyone for the best to rule, right? They seem to unironically think that that was in the best interests of people of color and women and people without land. And in retrospect, we can say that's horseshit. Like, no, they did not govern in the best interests of those people.
Right.
And so really the people that you can trust to make decisions on behalf of the whole population is all of us, right?
Yeah.
The only person who has the only group that has the best interests of all of us in mind is essentially all of us. And sortition is just a scaling mechanism that allows us to get people to actually like get familiar with all the pros and cons of the decisions they're making. Like hear from like the diversity of perspectives that exist within society, like a Dunbar type number where we can actually exist as we did in tribes, hundreds of thousands of years ago, I guess tens of thousands of years ago, to say like, I know what everyone thinks. My tribe is in agreement that this is the best path forward. That's the way our psychology developed. And I think we need to understand that those small group dynamics are important for decision-making, wise decision-making.
Yeah, that's great points. Great points.
Yeah.
Now, you're a content creator, and you did a post recently talking about one of my favorite recent series that's out there now, the Dungeon Crawler Carl series.
Oh, yeah.
And in one book later in the series, Carl encounters a planet that supposedly had sortition It was governed by sortition, and
Right.
you called them out.
Yeah.
And you said that I don't think you actually understand sortition, Matt Dinneman, author of Dungeon Crawler Carl. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh man, Scott, you have a much bigger following than me. So Matt Dinneman, if you're watching, hey man, I love your book.
I doubt he's watching.
He's so cool. But yeah, in one of the books, the Lemig Sortition, and I like from comments on my content. I think if you're reading like an online version of that book, it's called the Lemig Sortition. If you're reading like the hardback copy, which is what I have, it says Lemig Sortition.
Oh, interesting.
So I mean, who knows what Matt intended there? But I imagine probably as the hard copy version, he meant sortition. But yeah, so in the book, it's like Mordecai, which is sort of like the guide for Princess Donut and Carl, is saying like giving feedback about this society that called the Lemig Sortition, where everybody votes on everything and you need 80% agreement to change a decision once it's passed.
Yikes.
Which is like totally contrary to sortition. Sortition like directly addresses the types of problems you would have if you needed to have everyone vote on everything.
Yeah.
Like that representative random sampling, the most empirically validated way to accurately understand a population, like that's a scaling mechanism.
Yeah.
So that you don't have dumb decisions stay forever and you don't have like rational ignorance problems, right? So I don't know what Matt Dinneman's intention was there. It's like the Lemig Sortition like does play pretty heavily into the later books, and he hasn't finished the series, and so I don't know if like that's going to be some like galactic conspiracy to like suppress real democracy, which is totally my hope. So Matt Dinneman, if you're watching, you can finish that series in a way that'll make one fan really happy. But it might have just been an oversight. He wrote a ton of books and they're great books. You should check them out.
A lot of fun. I just read the first one. I really loved it. I have the second one racked up and ready to go. I'm really looking forward to it.
Sweet.
Okay, let's see here. What else? Oh, yeah. Okay. So, what do you think of expanding sortition beyond legislatures into the judicial system? Could we hold lotteries to appoint judges or even Supreme Court justices, do you think?
Yeah, I think we could. I think a tricky thing is here, like for some positions, you really do need expertise. And so like, I think it might be reasonable to say like, we have a set of justices or, maybe people who qualify to be a chief justice or to be a Supreme Court justice. But of that pool, instead of like someone politically appointing them, we randomly select them. Yeah. Honestly, what I would prefer is if we just had like advisory Supreme Court justices, people who write opinions.
Right.
And then we had like a big jury body decide which of those opinions is actually going to become constitutional.
Yeah.
And then also probably give that sortition body an option of none of the above, in which case it would call one of those smaller, like 100-person civic assemblies to review the case and write their own opinion that then would like go before a bigger 500-person jury, decide, that's what becomes constitutional law.
Yeah.
I think that would be a great way to approach the judicial system.
Yeah, or just like everybody in the bar system could be randomly appointed a judge at some point in their career, just like plucked out, like, hey, you're a judge now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is still a interesting use of sortition because it has that same anti-corruption scheme where, and like helps to reduce partisan influence, because if you can't predict who's going to be like your successor and who's going, like, also, for these people that are appointed randomly, they should probably have their performance evaluations completed by a sortition body that like hears from advocates and detractors to say, yeah, this justice did a great job, or no, she didn't, and then decide whether or not she gets a fat bonus or whether she goes to prison, right, or whatever.
Whoa, okay.
I mean, just as an example. And since you brought up the judicial system, I think another common concern that people have is like, well, what about the president or what about executives?
Right.
And I would say it would be a mistake to apply sortition, like random selection, to an executive, someone who needs like special administrative skills, right? That being said, I think we should treat like executives more as like city administrators or like city managers, basically, where they are hired to implement the will of the people rather than to make policy.
Right.
So like the office of the president basically has gained so much legislative authority because of how dysfunctional our Congress is.
Right.
And if we had a more like functional legislative system, ideally with sortition, that would be much less of a problem. And we could say, hey, we're going to hire this administrator. They're going to be paid well enough so that we're not super worried about corruption. And then they're going to have like regular performance evaluations by sortition bodies to say, like, to hear from, proponents and detractors to say, yep, this person is doing a bad job, or no, they're not. We can write specific rules about like how much discretionary like policy leeway do they have on different things. And I think that should happen for basically every like administrative position.
Mhm.
So, I work in public health. Like the director of health and human services is someone who like should basically answer to a sortition body. They should be hired, fired, and have their performance evaluations performed by a representative random sample of the public that they are answering to,
Yeah.
who has access to experts in public health who can say, like, yeah, I like what they're doing in Medicaid, but holy hell, what they're doing in HIV prevention is idiotic. And then, they can design like policy guardrails for whoever they hire next.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that. I love the idea of expanding this just beyond legislation. And I think about if we were to reshape the Constitution to bring sortition elements in, I think, government tends to, and economics, they mirror each other, right? So we have a very capitalistic government here because we have a very capitalistic economy. But I wonder, I was thinking also like about the applications in the workplace of having randomly selected members of the board and, from the workers, the workers of a company, just
Right.
like this group is in for a certain amount of time or what have you.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
I think I am a strong proponent of worker democracy.
Yeah.
I think the people who make the value should own the value.
Yeah.
And but like Mondragon. I guess I don't know how to pronounce that.
Sometimes I give it a Spanish flair and say Mondragon.
Mondragon. Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah, quiero aprender español, pero no hablo mucho. Lo siento. Mi español es terrible. Yeah. So, anyways, Mondragon. They are actually. I've heard that they're doing small experiments with sortition bodies.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So
I think I could love them even more than I already did. I did not.
I mean, no institution is perfect, but I think that's a strong point in favor.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. That's great. Okay. Boy, I think I've gone through all of my questions here. Wow. Any other thoughts? Is there anything we didn't touch on in this discussion that you would like to bring up?
I think I covered all the high points, and
Yeah.
God, I'm just like incredibly grateful that you invited me to be on your podcast, and
The
like
pleasure's all mine, Ian.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I love your content. I'm a big supporter of sortition. I really like this idea. It's got me really jazzed. If I could talk about my own personal sortition journey,
Yeah,
I
please do.
read a book about 10 years ago, Astra Taylor's Democracy May Not Exist, but We'll Miss It When It's Gone.
Right.
And she didn't spend a lot of time talking about sortition, but she did bring in Aristotle's quote that, pointing out that Aristotle and Plato hated democracy
Yeah.
because they saw it as rule by the poor, and that sortition was, that Aristotle said that sortition's how you have democracy and elections are how you have oligarchy. And that was tough for me to hear,
Yeah.
because we grow up in this society hearing over and over, elections are democracy, elections are democracy.
Right.
This is our only, and it's the only outlet we have, unless you're a real activist and you're out there in the streets. It's one of the only options for everyday people to participate in our political system. And
Yeah.
so I was drinking the Kool-Aid, and it took me but that stuck with me, what the Aristotle quote and what she'd said about it. And I thought about it for a long time, and finally I was like, I see it now. Like,
Listeners, take heed. If you feel poor, sortition is what puts you in power.
yeah.
Yeah. I guess since we're kind of wrapping up here, the thing that I'm really hopeful for is that we get constitutional reform in my lifetime that establishes a recurring sortition body, basically, so that we don't have to do everything all at once.
Yeah.
Right? I think it might be reasonable to try ranked choice voting or proportional representation, or, shout out to approval voting or Condorcet or star voting people out there.
That's part of the Democratic Socialist platform right now.
Yeah.
Or some of those changes.
Yeah. So, but the point is, We want a permanent foothold for these fundamental documents that will allow us to learn and adapt over time. So that if we try ranked choice voting and it doesn't give us the outcomes that we want, we don't have to like build up another giant movement or have another crisis to try to change the Constitution again. I want a permanent foothold so that we, the people, can like wisely and change the Constitution in a way that benefits us.
Yeah.
That we can make well-considered decisions that truly reflect what all of us would want if we had all the time to fully participate, become informed, and deliberate towards consensus together.
Yeah.
So I think, like, for people who are out there advocating for a general strike, for people who are thinking about like, okay, yes, we need constitutional reform, I would say, like, please think about sortition as a way to get us a permanent foothold, so we don't have to get it all right on the first try.
Yeah. I think that's a totally reasonable thing to be shooting for. But I'm shooting for more sortition than that.
Yeah.
I won't.
Me too. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, Ian, thank you so much for coming today. It's been a real pleasure having you. And I'll say what I always say at the end of my episodes: let's make them pay. What is Substack? It's like the greatest newspaper that ever existed. Completely decentralized. So many talented writers and artists in one place. The roster is stacked. Substack is similar to other social media platforms, just packed with incredible talent. Some of my favorites: Michael Ian Black,
Nana Bacon Aguirrewa,
Adam Coleman always gets my attention. Fantastic journalists like Radley Balco, Hamilton Nolan, even living legends like Seymour Hersh and Chris Hedges. Cultural commentators like Jamila Jamil, Holly Solemn, Caitlin Johnstone, and Nathan Rabin. Visionaries like David Shing and the Peaceful Revolutionary. Substack has about every possible genre you can imagine. There's a feed like Twitter. I like Substack's feed way better than X. You can find vertical videos like you see on Instagram Reels or TikTok. You can scroll through this feed and click the links to find excellent articles, one after the other. News stories, analysis, criticism, fiction, poetry, visual art, it's all there. If you're a reader, you should be on Substack. If you like being informed about what's happening in the world without an editorial staff getting in the way, you should be on Substack. Decentralization is democratic. Decentralization is the future. Decentralization means everybody's posting. Everyone who gets a Substack account has the option to start publishing. It's kind of like having your own blog, but that blog can grow into its own masthead with paid writers on staff. Centralization is what we see in mass media. Just 6 massive media companies own about 90% of the marketplace. Everything that's broadcast from these channels is filtered through the perspective of their billionaire owners. What does Rupert Murdoch want? What does Jeff Bezos think of this editorial? Media companies are top-down authoritarian organizations. As such, they will always reflect the biases of their owners. We can see top-down changes happening at CBS right now. Barry Weiss and Larry Ellison have delivered a fatal 1-2 knockout to CBS News' journalistic integrity and hard-won reputation. Substack doesn't have editorial control or centralization. Substack's writers have journalistic freedom. It's like every person on Substack has their own printing press. That's decentralization. My content gets attention on Substack. Subscribing to letsmakethempay.substack.com is the only way to avoid suppression of my content. That's because every post I make is sent out as an email. This makes it easy to make sure you never miss a post and allows you to go back and watch or read it again. Every writer on Substack has ownership of their email list and can take it with them. Substack also makes it super easy to monetize your content. That money is not dependent on some creator fund or algorithm. A subscriber pays, Substack takes a small finder's fee size cut, you get your money. Easy peasy. Fair too. Decentralization. So check out Substack today, a really worthwhile platform. Maybe consider publishing a little content of your own. Flex some creative muscle. Download the app or go to letsmakethempay.substack.com to get started. Let's make them pay. Thanks, dude.
Yeah.
Great job.
That was
I
great.
think that turned out great. A little over an hour. Perfect.
Sweet.
All right, man.